with Mr. Michael Vecchione, who's been on here innumerable times. This is his second live episode. Today is Monday, February 27th, 2023 at 2:05 p.m. Eastern time to do part four of about Luigi the Zip. And yeah, Mr. Vecchione, for the new listeners, please introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me, Tom. And my name is Michael Vecchione. And for those of you who don't know who I am, I was the chief of the Rackets Division in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, chief of the Homicide Bureau, chief of trials. I did a lot. I was a prosecutor for about 30 years. And the Luigi story, the story of Homicide is My Business, which is the name of the book that I wrote about Luigi. I met him when I was a senior trial assistant way back in my first stint in the DA's office. So it was an interesting experience, one that I had never had before, dealing with an informant slash hitman slash mobster who wanted to be a made man. It was quite an experience, and it stayed with me for all of these years. I mean, we're talking about probably met him in 1979, and when I wrote this book with Jerry Schmetterer, my good buddy, we did it in 2020, and so there's a lot of years in between. 40 almost. Am I right with that? About that? So yeah. So anyway, that's so we've covered a lot of Luigi's life in New York and in Catania, Sicily, where he came from, and his life as a hitman. But there's a whole other part of Luigi's life here in New York, in Brooklyn, actually, that we've never talked about, and it's kind of like the second half to me. He came to the United States because he was really a successful it's so hard to say this, a successful hitman in Sicily, carrying out hits for the Catania mafia, and he was never made, and that was really the whole point of him coming to America. It was suggested to him that if he went to Brooklyn, the mob in Brooklyn, which was the Bonanno family at that time, was looking for people to protect them. They were involved with a drug empire and a drug trafficking empire with the Sicilians, and it was actually became a very very popular motion picture called The French Connection. And when that was set up, they were not going to, they meaning the Bonannos, were not looking to share the profits that they were making with the other four families in New York. And they figured that was going to create an issue, and maybe a shooting war or shooting incidents. And they needed people for protection. So they were importing Zips. They were importing guys from Sicily who were like Luigi, who were not necessarily made men, but aspired to be made men. And I use the term Zip because that's what the American mafia called these guys. They were looked down upon, the Sicilians. They were, looked down upon as kind of like the little brothers of the American mafia, when in fact it was the other way around. I mean, obviously the mafia began in Sicily, but they were looked down upon by their American brothers here particularly here in Brooklyn. And Luigi was perfect for this role because he was a really good, as I said before, very good hitman and very loyal. I mean, that was the basis for him wanting to become a made guy. He said that he grew up in this in that kind of idea that you aspire to become a mafia figure if you're a kid in Sicily. And I know I've said this before on the show, but he testified at some point in front of Congress and told a senator that in America, young boys aspire to be baseball players, and in Sicily, young boys aspire to be mafia, and that's what he did. So his frustration grew as time went on. He was successful in what he was doing over there, and he was sent to New York to perhaps become a made man in Brooklyn because of the need for these Sicilians. And I really have to put into context what we're talking about as far as money is concerned. The Bonanno family was making millions of dollars a week in importing heroin came from the Middle East to Sicily, labs in Sicily, the French connection, then to Marseille, and then from Marseille to the United States. And Luigi was working as, you know, his primary job was to kill people, but he was also obviously was open to do things for the American mafia, for the Bonanno family, and for the Gambino family. That didn't have anything to do with killing people. They needed couriers. They needed and what used to happen and how he got involved in the drug trade is that he was introduced to a guy whose name was Felice Puma, and Puma was a very trusted associate of the Bonanno family. He was I'm not sure if Puma was a made man. He might have been, but what his primary role was to facilitate the drug business for the Bonannos, and it centered in an area of Brooklyn on it was actually the name of the area is Greenpoint, but it was centered on one street, Knickerbocker Avenue, and they had various social clubs and illegal casinos and things of that nature, and but the primary business for them at that point was drug distribution and drug sales, and they were making a fortune. The reason that they were so successful and is because they had a guy. Joe Bonanno was the Don. He was the guy who ran the family, but they had an underboss whose name was Carmine Galante, and Galante was always into the drug business, always. And as some of your listeners or viewers are going to say, well, the mafia doesn't get involved in drugs. We watched the Godfather, and they said, it's illegal to be involved with drugs. Well, it is illegal, but it was something that the mafia did on the QT. They just, they did it on the down low. They didn't want people to know that they were involved, but they were. And you could understand why, because if they were bringing in millions of dollars a week, that's a lot of money to turn down, and not sharing it was a mortal sin as far as the other families are concerned. So guys like Luigi were brought in, and one of Luigi's roles was to take forged passports, American passports, to Canada and get in, because he had a legitimate passport, and he worked with a guy named Paolo Laporta, who was also one of the Knickerbocker Avenue guys. And one of their jobs was to drive from Brooklyn up to the Canadian border, use their legitimate passports to get into Canada, where they would meet Sicilians who had emigrated from Sicily into Canada. It was easier to get into Canada, obviously, than it was to get into the United States. And then when Luigi and Laporta got up there, they would distribute the passports. And then all of these Sicilians then would use those passports to cross the border and come into the United States, and then down to Brooklyn, and that was a very successful business, because believe me, the Bonannos didn't do that for nothing. Those guys had to pay for those passports, Yeah. So part of his job was to ensure that things continued to be calm and in terms of the drug business on Knickerbocker Avenue, and he was good for that, because he didn't take shit from anybody. He was a very loyal guy. Honor was his big thing. I mean, one of the subtitles of the book was, Luigi the Zip, a hitman's quest for honor. Mm-hmm. He felt that he wasn't honored in Sicily, and he came to New York thinking he would rectify that. Never happened, by the way. It never happened, because no matter how good he was at what he did, he was never made. And that was really stuck in his craw. That really was something that bothered him a great deal. So he gets involved in the drug business very simply. This guy Puma, it was transporting French Connection drugs from Brooklyn. I'm sorry, from Knickerbocker Avenue, which for your listeners is in the northern part of the borough. And they drove it down south to the southern part of the borough to a Gambino contact. The Bananos had the northern part of the borough. Gambino's Colombo family, they were even the Lucchese family in the southern part of Brooklyn. So when the Bananos needed to have drugs transported to their counterparts in the Gambino family, Luigi and Puma were two of the guys that they leaned on, and they made these trips carrying significant amount of heroin. It was coming in, it was being distributed. It was like a pipeline, and when they would get to the area, the Gambino area, they had a particular guy that they would meet, and he would take the drugs. Obviously, money was transferred, and then they would be back on Knickerbocker Avenue and doing all of the stuff that they do until another shipment of drugs came in, and it was a regular thing. And Luigi was very good at it. He because he was willing to do anything to protect the load that he had in the car, and he wanted to always show the Bananos that he was a reliable guy, so that they would ultimately, make him. They would induct him into the mafia. One day, Puma meets him, and Luigi thinks that they're going to do a run from Knickerbocker to Bensonhurst, which is the area of Brooklyn where the Gambinos were. And it turns out, Puma says to him, "There's the pipeline shut off. There's no drugs." Well, we know why, because the feds busted the French Connection and the New York City Police Department. So that was a real problem. It was a real problem for Luigi because he was paid very well to be the shotgun on the car on these distribution runs. And as I mentioned to you before, Tom, is that he was always in need of money. The guy was a gambler, and he was a womanizer, and he was a drinker. He was always looking for money. The fact that this drug business dried up, which was a regular thing, the hits were when he was contracted to do a hit, that was a happenstance. Well, it's not a regular thing where he comes in and they say, okay, today you're going to hit A, B, C, or D. No, it's when it was only on a need basis, but the drug thing was regular. So he was pulling in, a good deal of money. And when it stopped, it was a real problem for him. And that leads to one of the events that kind of added to his frustration with the American mafia, and added to his at some point his fear that he was going to be killed. But and this is what the event was. He was in dire need of money. And one of the he had a contact who had set up a robbery of in the Diamond District in New York City, 47th Street. For those of you who don't know New York City, 47th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue. I'm sorry, between 6th and 7th Avenue there are jewelry stores and diamond dealers lining up both sides of the street. Now it's a long block, but both sides, and the stores were very small, so there were lots of them. Luigi had a contact. They were going to hit a particular place, and he and a buddy of his, who was not a wise guy. He was just a friend of Luigi's, but a criminal. They hit this diamond. They hit the diamond dealer, and they stole $1 million worth of diamonds, and walked out of the store. And the plan was for Luigi to carry the diamonds in a bag from 6th Avenue, which is on the west side of Manhattan, all the way across to the east side of Manhattan. And he was going to meet someone on 2nd Avenue, I think, and hand the diamonds off. Luigi then went to Chicago. the guy who took the diamonds, then brought them to a fence who was going to take care of getting rid of them, a guy by the name of Enzo Napoli. And Enzo Napoli, as it turns out, didn't like Luigi. But this was Luigi's deal. I mean, and he's the guy who took the risk. And it's a great risk. They did it in the middle of the day. Now, if you ever were in Manhattan, particularly in those days, at that time of the day, there were hundreds of people on the street and thousands of people on the street in business and going in and out of these businesses, and people in other business buildings, big buildings, working, and it was just a lot of people around. But they were able to pull this thing off, walk all the way across town, hand the diamonds off. Luigi's buddy, took off to wherever he went. The idea was for him to go to Chicago and wait until the diamonds were fenced, wait until things calmed down, and then he was going to be brought back and get his piece of the loot. So, I mean, a piece of $1 million is pretty good. He was really set for. He thought that this would really set him up.
And
so,
what year is it?
We're talking about in the mid-70s, early to mid-70s, 1970. So
yeah, that's a part of $1 million in the 70s. $1
million
50 years later now. Yeah. So
yeah. Yep. Yeah. So he does, things go well, and he hops on a plane, goes to Chicago, and he checks into a hotel in Chicago, gets a room, and he now has to wait. There's really nothing to do except wait till he gets a call from Brooklyn. It's okay to come back. So while he's in the lobby one day or at the bar, he meets this woman, and she strikes up a conversation with him, and she asks him, he's staying at the hotel, and he says, yeah. And she asks him what room, and he tells her, and she says, well, that's a small room. I'm staying with my daughter. We have a suite in the upper part of the hotel, and maybe you want to meet my daughter. She was trying to set this guy up, although he never told her that he was married and had a couple of kids, because that's the way he was. So she says, why don't you come up, look at the suite, and then you should move in with us. We have an extra bedroom. It's a nice, big, beautiful suite. He goes, okay. And he does. He moves all of his stuff out, doesn't tell the desk or anything, but he just moves, and he goes up there. I think the next day, at night, 2 or 3 guys from Brooklyn come into the hotel, and they go to the desk, and they ask this young woman who's behind the desk, what's Luigi Roncesvalli's room number? And she tells them, and they say, well, you want to go get into the room. We want to see him. She says, well, I can't do that. I can let you in. I'll go up with you. She goes upstairs, up to wherever the floor was, and they opens up the door for them. They walk in, and they open up with guns. They blast they shoot the bed, they shoot everything, they shoot up, because they thought he was sleeping. It was late at night. Well, he had moved to the other place. They were there to hit him. They were there to kill him. And it was Enzo Napoli who set this whole thing up to kill him. When he found this out,
you broke up, Mike. All right, for everybody watching, hold on, I'll text Mike.
What are you talking to me for? I was the one who was.
Sorry, the internet you just cut out for a second. We're back.
Oh, okay. Chicago police came and wanted to know wanted to know everything about him. And he said, I don't know why you're asking me. I was the target of this whole thing. So he said, I had to spend the whole day in the police station. Someone tried to kill me, and I got stuck in a police station in Chicago for the entire day. That was his big problem. But he was burning, Tom. He was burning. And by the time he got back to Brooklyn, he wanted to kill Enzo Napoli, who was a made guy. And instead, they set up this meeting where they were going to kind of quash everything and divide up the money, divide up the diamonds at a restaurant in Manhattan early in the day before it opened up. And he goes to the restaurant, and he's with his buddy who did the robbery with him, and the Bonanno people are there, Gambino people are there, and there's a guy there who's acting as sort of like the mediator, and Enzo Napoli is there. And Napoli starts dividing the diamonds up. And Luigi gets nothing, no diamonds. They told him that we'll give you $30,000. He was out of his mind, crazy. $30,000. You tried to kill me. It's $1 million worth of diamonds, and this is what you're going to give me, 30,000. So he says he's watching, and there's one big diamond left. Before they told him that they were getting a 30, he thought that that diamond was his. He says, but at that point, somebody came into the restaurant, and everybody looked up, and the person sat down, and it was Paul Castellano, who was the boss of the Gambino family. And what did Napoli do? He took the big diamond, handed it to Castellano. This is yours, Don Castellano. Castellano looked at it, put it in his pocket, and took off. Now Luigi is out of his mind. What the fuck are they giving this guy money? This guy a diamond? He had nothing to do with this. He was nuts. But his bosses were there, and they told him essentially, Luigi, keep your mouth shut and take the 30 and be happy about it. So that was a slap in the face to him. And it was one that he never forgot, because he was treated like as he used to say, he was treated like merde, which is shit in Italian. And that was kind of strike one, maybe 1.5 in terms of him getting the sense as to what these guys were like. So that was but he needed that money, obviously, because of no drugs. Then a miracle happens. Again, he's on Knickerbocker Avenue. He gets called by Puma. Come down and meet me at the club. And Puma says to him, essentially, he says, ever hear of that pipeline that brings oil to the United States? He says, we got one of those now. And the drugs are going to start flowing again. What this was now was what ultimately became known as the pizza connection. And the reason it was called that is that the Bonanno set up this distribution network from Sicily to the United States, and the drugs were going to be packed in pizza supply boxes. So a box of mozzarella cheese, well, there would be heroin in it. A box of olive oil, heroin in it. A box of tomato sauce, heroin in it. And what Galante and Bonanno did is they were setting up pizza joints in places on the East Coast as well as into as far west as Chicago, so that when all of the stuff came in, there were places for all of these supplies to go, as opposed to just 1 or 2 places in Brooklyn. And then they would send their people out to the location, pick up the drugs, drive it back to New York, and then the distribution was back on track, the distribution of this thing. Now, Tom, we're talking about even more heroin than with the French connection. And Luigi is told about this, and he says, good, money is good. Now, he told me that it was, in reality, he thought that it was a very bad thing to be involved in the drug business. He said it was no honor in selling the drugs, because he knew where it was going to go. Kids would get killed and would die from it, and people would die. And he really, I believe that he felt that way, but it wasn't strong enough for him to say, "Fuck you, I'm not doing it." So he because he needed the money. So they told him. So he said, "So what do you want me to do?" So Puma tells him, "Here's what you're going to do. We're in Brooklyn, in New York. We have to get pounds of this heroin to Los Angeles, and you're going to bring it from Brooklyn to LA." And they tell him, "We'll tell you what you need to do." So the first thing they do is they tell him to go buy a suit, jacket, and pants, 3 sizes too big for him. Now, I can't even imagine now what that size of that suit was, because he was not a slim person. If you have the book, you saw his picture in the book.
He's a bowling ball.
Yeah. So they told him to buy this suit. Now, here's what they did. So he would then report to Knickerbocker Avenue when all of the drugs were ready to go. They were packaged and everything. And they handed it to him, and he stuffed every pocket that he could with the stuff. And he was also strapped onto him, taped onto him. underneath the shirt, etc. And then he put the big suit on, and he couldn't tell. He looks like a fat guy. The second part was when he got to the airport, he was not to get on the plane when they make a first call or a second call or even a third call. He had to wait until the very last call for the very last person to be on. And then he was told to essentially run up to the gate with his ticket just as they were closing the door so he could get on the plane and there would be no questions asked. Now we're talking about in the 70s. So there was obviously no 9/11. There were no metal detectors. There was nothing. You just get on the plane, right?
Yeah.
So that was part two. Part three was when you get on the plane and you start out, you said you do not fall asleep. You cannot fall asleep under any circumstance. You have to stay awake from New York to California because they were afraid that if someone tried to wake him up to get off, they would feel what he had, and that would be the end of it. So he had to sit for whatever it is, 6 hours, 7 hours on that plane in his suit jacket, stuffed with all of these pounds of heroin.
Jesus.
When he got to LA, now he got through, I think it was either JFK, probably JFK to go, got into JFK in New York, onto the plane, no problem. He now had to get off the plane and get through LAX to get, in Los Angeles. He had to get out of the airport and meet whoever he had to meet, and then they would drive into LA proper, and he distributed the heroin. And he did it. He did it successfully, and he did it more than one time. The first time, however, he got to LA, he met the person he was supposed to meet, and they drove to wherever this guy's location was. I don't remember exactly if it was his house or social club or whatever. Distributes all of the stuff. And the guy says to him, the LA person says, "You're not going to go back right away." He says, "We got time to party." Well, that's all Luigi had to hear. And it's all going to be on the LA guy. So he spent 2-3 days just partying, drinking. He didn't do drugs, but he did drink. Women, that kind of stuff. He now had this new, what he thought was going to be a very dangerous situation. He was loving it. He's loving it. So he became buddies with the guy in LA, with the drug dealer in LA, because every time he would come back, come with a load of drugs. The guy, he spent 2 or 3 days partying with this guy. So that was his first foray into this transcontinental drug dealing. So they then said to him, "Okay, now you got to go to Chicago." And it's a little different with Chicago. You're not going to go with the suit. We're not going to stuff, because you don't have to worry about that. But what you're going to carry is a suitcase. And we're going to load the suitcase up with the heroin packages, and you'll get on the train. Nobody checks you. Of course, nobody checks in terms of a train. You get on, you pay, you turn your ticket in, and that's it. You find your seat. But they did tell him one thing: when you get on the train, do not put the suitcase in the overhead compartment, because they were worried that if it was out of his hands, somebody else could get their hands on it, and that would be the end of it. And once again, do not fall asleep between New York and Chicago. So he does. When he gets to Chicago, the plan was he was going to walk out of the Union Station carrying the suitcase, and there was supposed to be a guy who was pretending to be a cab driver. That he knew what Luigi looked like. He goes up to him, "Sir, do you need a car?" Yeah, I need a car. Gets in. He says, "Okay, my car's right over here." Gets into the back seat. The driver gets into the front seat. He drives literally around the corner from the entrance to Union Station and stops the car. Luigi gets out, leaves the suitcase in the car, goes back around the corner to Union Station, gets on the train back to New York. That's, so again, without any problems at all. Without any problems. He did. And this guy he said this guy was a little different than the guy in LA. The first time, I skipped one thing. The first time he went, before he got out of the car, the guy wanted to check the suitcase to make sure it was heroin. And he opened it up. and it was packaged not exactly the way that the guy thought it should be packaged. And he said to him, well, why did you package this way? Why? I forgot what it was. The tape was wrong. I don't remember. And Luigi got pissed off. He said, no, me, I just do what I'm told to do. And the guy was angry at him. He got angry. He said, that's not the deal. That was not the deal. But so Luigi basically said, take it up, with the bosses in New York. Yeah. I mean, that was, it was really a strange thing for the guy to get pissed off about the way the heroin was packaged. So he goes back and he said, but he had to do it several more times to Chicago. That was one of his regular routes. And of course, the guy calmed down when the next time and the time after that, and things were okay. So that was two. There was a third route, and this one was a little different. This one was the opposite. He had to go pick up drugs. So once again, he gets a call from Puma. I want you to go to LaGuardia Airport. That's the other airport in New York. Tomorrow morning, buy a ticket for Miami. You get to Miami, you get in a cab, and you go to a particular street corner on the beach. Collins Avenue is a big avenue street that's in Miami Beach. And they don't tell him why. They just tell him, you just go there. And so he does, blindly. He just wakes up, goes to LaGuardia, gets on the plane, gets to Miami, and he gets to that location when he's supposed to be there. This is early in the morning. We took a really early flight. He said, next thing I see is this Porsche. And I recognize the Porsche. And then who gets out? Puma gets out of the Porsche. Puma was already there. The Porsche, he pulls up, he says to Luigi, get in. Luigi gets into the front seat, and he hands him a shotgun and a pistol. The shotgun was much to Luigi's liking. It was called a Lupara. It was the kind of shotgun that they use in Sicily. So he was very, very familiar with it. And he says to Puma, well, what are we doing? He said the trunk or the back of the car, I don't know how much of a trunk a Porsche could have, but the whole back of the car was filled with heroin, filled. Where are we going? We have to drive all of this up to Knickerbocker Avenue. So he gets in, and they start out, and they drive from Miami Beach all the way to Brooklyn. They never get stopped, Tom. Never by any highway cops. You got to drive through some small towns because unless they took 95 all the way, I'm not sure exactly what they did, but he told me, he said, I couldn't believe it. No one ever stopped us. No one said a word. Now think about what Luigi looked like. And I'm sure Puma looked the same way. To me, there's got to be some redneck cop down in the South who looks at these two guys and says, I better check this out. Never happened. So, and this is key. This becomes key later on. So he gets to Knickerbocker Avenue. Who's waiting for them? But the guy, the Bonanno who ran Knickerbocker Avenue and was running this whole drug operation, a guy by the name of Toto Catalano. And Catalano is waiting for them. And when they get there, they drive up to where Catalano is. Catalano goes to the back of the car, takes out whatever kind of container all of this heroin was in, and takes it into his social club. Luigi gets paid, and he goes home. They did that more than one time. And why does that become important? Because later on in life, when he turns and becomes a witness, he testifies in front of Ronald Reagan's Commission on Organized Crime. And he testifies to the subject matter of the commission was mob drug trafficking. So he was a perfect witness for this. And I'll tell you about that in a second, how he gets involved. And he talks about how what I just told you, and how Catalano takes the drugs and that's it. Now, Catalano becomes one of the lead defendants in the Pizza Connection trial that Rudy Giuliani and Louis Freeh, who later becomes the head of the FBI, were doing in New York. They saw and read about Luigi's testimony, and they realized, how did we miss this guy as a witness? He gives us Catalano. And in the back of the book, I include the indictment for the pizza connection. The second name on the indictment is Catalano. So Luigi becomes an important witness. He doesn't know it at that point, of course, but he knows that when he gets back with the drugs from Miami, it all went to Catalano, and Catalano did whatever he had done with it. So that is what that became his essentially his main source of income. This, the whole thing with the drugs. He was doing a hit here or there, and in the midst of this, he gets a call from a Gambino capo who had used Luigi before for a hit, and he tells him that there's a guy who's very important to the mafia who is looking for somebody to do some work for him. Now, of course, Luigi knows exactly what that means. This guy's name is Sindona. Look, and Sindona. Michele Sindona. Sindona was an international criminal, but until he became known as an international criminal, he was known as a financier, an international financier, who was essentially his business was to take over banks in Italy. The Vatican Bank being one of them. He had fooled the Pope into giving him control of the Vatican Bank, and what he was doing was he was essentially raping these banks and putting the money into his own pocket, in addition to using the banks to launder drug money for the most part, the Gambino family. So Sindona comes to the United States. He was so successful with the banks in Italy. He comes to the United States and he takes over a bank that was headquartered on Long Island here in New York. It's called the Franklin National Bank. And he does the same thing. He basically drains the bank, puts it out of business, causes it to go bankrupt and collapse. And keep in mind now, whenever this happened, the people who had their money in these banks lost their money. And one of the individuals who recognized what Sindona was doing in Venice became Pope John Paul I. He was the Cardinal of Venice. And he knew what was going on. And he knew that when the bank in Venice that Sindona had caused to collapse, a lot of the people who were parishioners up there lost their life savings, lost everything. And so, we kind of project this, but I could see the Cardinal at this point thinking, why is the Vatican, why is Pope John Paul VI allowing this guy to do this? Doesn't he see what's going on? John Paul VI dies. And who's elected Pope? But the Cardinal from Venice. And he becomes Pope John Paul I. And now Sindona knows, oh man, this guy does not like me. This guy knows what's going on. And they knew that it was a matter of time before the Vatican pipeline was shut off. So they had to do him in. So Sindona and others were behind killing Pope John Paul I. And they poisoned him. That's how he died, in his sleep. So this is the guy now that comes to New York and does this with the Franklin National Bank. He gets caught. He gets nailed in New York for the Franklin National Bank. At the same time, he gets indicted in Italy for the collapse of all of these banks in Italy. So he's now a wanted criminal in Italy, but he's living in the United States. He's wanted and under indictment in the United States in the Southern District, Federal Court in Southern District of New York. And the Italian authorities want him extradited to Italy so he can stand trial. The American authorities had agreed to do that, but Sindona put up a fight, so there had to be a hearing in New York. In the meantime, they indicted him in New York. So now he had problems in both places, New York as well as in Italy. So how does a mafia person get out of this problem? He decides to kill the people who were in charge of the investigation in New York and the investigation in Italy. That was his way out. It's the only way he knew. So in Italy, the prosecutor / judge, and in New York, it was an assistant U.S. attorney who was in charge of the case, both the extradition hearing as well as the Franklin National Bank case. And this is what Sindona proposes to Luigi. Luigi, of course, is always looking for money, right? He goes and meets Sindona. Sindona tells him $100,000 for the hit in New York and $100,000 for the hit in Italy. In New York, I want you to kill the prosecutor. And then I don't want you to just leave him on the street. I want you to stuff his pockets with drugs so that it looks like it's a drug hit. And then you go to Italy and you kill the judge in Italy. So when he tells me this story, he says, Mike, I knew I cannot do this. He says, I'm finished if I kill a prosecutor in New York. So he tells Sindona, no, I'm not doing this. Well, that was kind of the last straw, because at this point, Luigi feels that I'm a dead man. This guy is a major criminal, major figure in the mafia. I don't help him. I agree. I tell him I disagree with him. I don't. He goes, can't hire me. He knows that it's just a matter of time before he is killed. But that doesn't stop him from doing crimes, because he does a robbery in Queens. He gets word that there's a courier every week at a particular time on a particular day is at this particular spot. You'll see him coming out of an office building with a bag, and that usually has $30,000 in it, $40,000. He says, okay, gets two other guys who live in Queens. They jump in one of this guy's car. They wait and sit, and they see the courier. Luigi says to me, I see it. I see the courier. He says, but Mike, there's no man. There's a woman. I cannot rob a woman. It's something that we don't do in Sicily. But he was so hard up for money that he did it. And when he got the bag into the car and opened it up, there was like $3,000 in the bag. They drove to the guy that owned the car, drove to his house to split the money up. He lived not that far from the robbery site. And when they start to split the money up, police cars all around. Someone must have seen it. They did it in broad daylight on the street, a busy street in Queens. And they arrest him. And they bring him to court. $500 bail is set, which is was low. But for me, an armed robbery, that's very low. But that's what it was. Luigi can't make the bail. That's how hard up he was for money. So this is, and when he told me this, I kind of looked at him like, are you crazy? What he did was he called Sindona, and he says to Sindona, you got to get me out, bail me out. I cannot get it. I can't be in the courtroom. My family can't know that I robbed a woman. Nobody can know. They can't know in Sicily. And he hints to Sindona that I've got stuff on you. Get me out of jail. And the hint is, you won't see me again. Sindona tells him basically, no. So Luigi has no way to turn, turns to his brother-in-law. Thank God his brother-in-law, for his purposes, had money, and his brother-in-law bails him out. So he goes back home, and the first person he calls is Sindona again. And he says to him, listen, you give me $30,000 and I'll get out of the country. I disappear. You never have to hear from me again. Don't worry. I will say nothing. Sindona tells him no. Luigi says, Mike, I knew that if I went into jail, if I got convicted, and he says, and I'm going to get convicted because, again, we did this in broad daylight. He says, I'm a dead man.
Yeah,
I'm a dead man. They're going to kill me. Sindona's going to kill me. So what he does is he walks into the 9th precinct in Manhattan, police precinct, and he goes up to the desk officer and says to him, I want to talk to the FBI. And they get the FBI down, and he turns. He becomes an informant at that point. Now, so I told you, so that was Sindona was one of the things that, in addition to the Chicago situation, so he's getting the idea that, oh, there's one other situation where I don't think we talked about in terms of why he wanted out. And he told me that at some point he started to think about getting out. He wanted to start a new business at one point in his career, and he was going to be a loan shark, but he didn't have money. So he talked to someone, and someone told him that there's a Gambino guy who was a businessman. He owns a place called the Ice's Queen of America. They distributed lemon ice and cherry ice and stuff to restaurants and things of that nature. And he tells him he'll lend you the money, and I put the good word in for you. There's no vig. It's not, he's going to give you 5,000. You pay him back 5,000. He says, okay. He goes and talks to the guy, and the guy treats him like shit, basically. He said, I was interrogated. He says, I came here and I was vouched for. Why are you asking me all these questions? And the guy was just that way. But he ultimately gave him the 5,000, but he gave him a time limit as to when he wanted it back. Luigi said to me, and there's no problem, because I had two guys who were going to borrow the 5,000, and they would get it back to me within a couple of days. So I was going to meet the deadline. Well, the day of the deadline, those two guys still hadn't come back with the money that Luigi lent to them. And he asked around Knickerbocker Avenue, where's, whatever, so-and-so and so-and-so. They said, well, they took off. They're gone. They left New York. Of course, they left Luigi now holding the bag. So he goes back to see the Ice's Queen of America guy. And he tells him, I need more time. I can't get it for you. The guy says, you're not getting more time. If you're not, this is on a Friday. That was when the day was a Friday that he had to give this back. He says, if you're not here tonight with that money, then I'm going to kill you. Luigi was at this point told me he was burning. He was burning. He says, I was vouched for. I'm good for it. He says, I thank you for lending, but you can't treat me. Don't treat me like that. He said, basically, tough. That's the deal. So Luigi said, I don't know what to do, because I leave. I get in my car. I asked them, do you have any way of getting this money? He goes, no. So he drove back to Knickerbocker Avenue, burning all the way. And he made a plan for himself. He drives back to the Ice's Queen location. It's now 9 o'clock at night. It's dark. He said, I knew everybody left, and the only person there would be the owner. He's always working in his office. And in his mind, he knew the way out. He walked in, described it for me. The guy looked up from his desk, and he basically, in his mind, the last thing you're ever going to see, motherfucker, is my face. And he shot him and killed him. It's the only time in the United States. He did it once in Italy. Only time in the United States that he did a killing for himself. All the rest of the times he did it for someone else. So he thought, okay, I'm done. Except that he has to go to the guy's wake. And at the wake, he meets the dead guy's brother. Dead guy's brother is a made guy in the Gambino family as well. And he approaches Luigi, and Luigi says to him, sorry about your brother. I'm sorry, my condolences. He says to him, come here. He says, you borrowed money from my brother. He said, well, I'm taking over now. You got to pay me the money. He said, you believe this? At the guys at the wake, he's asking me for the 5,000 that his brother. He says, I thought this was, all squash because I killed the guy. I said, so what'd you do? He says, well, I got the money. I don't know how he got it. He didn't tell me that, but I got the money and I paid him off. So he had these instances where he thought that because he was, an upstanding guy and he was loyal to the family that they wouldn't treat him this way, but they did. They did. So when he walks in and he tells the FBI all about the attempted murder of the or the plan to kill the prosecutor in New York, which is what they were interested in, they had what they needed. So now they were stuck with Luigi Roncesvalli. What are they going to do with this guy? So they checked his, they knew that he had an open case in Brooklyn, an open murder, because he had killed the guy at the New Corner restaurant who had raped his niece. And they brought him to the police, and the New York City Police Department got what they needed from him. And now they were stuck with him. So what are they going to do with him? Well, we'll give him to the DA's office. And that's what they did. They walked in one day with this guy in tow, and I got called into my boss's office, and my boss tells me that they have this informant, and his name is Roncesvalli. He says, "You're Italian. He's Italian. He's yours." And that's how the marriage was made between me and Luigi. And it was, for me, I was trying homicide cases, but I had not had a case like this. And I had the New Corners case, which was easy. You know, I told him to tell me the whole story, which he did. And then he opens up and tells me, I said, "You got to tell me everything." And he tells me about the Newark cop whose brother-in-law gets killed because he put his wife up in a bet. He tells me as many as I needed to know about. He goes into the Brooklyn House of Detention, which is where I kept him, and he learned other things about other cases and would come into the office and tell me about them. So he became a very important witness for me. And then when I was done, I got transferred to another. I got promoted and transferred. He wound up taking a plea to the murder. He got to the New Corners murder. I think he got 5 years as opposed to 25 to life. And he went into, and the deal was that he was going to do his time in a federal prison, which is supposed to be better. And he gets sent to Sandstone, Minnesota. And it was like he was transported to the moon. I mean, this is a guy who's it's cosmopolitan. He's in New York. He's in Rome. He's in Milan. He's in all, and now he's in the middle of Sandstone, Minnesota. He's in jail, and he talks to his lawyer almost every day. And one call, his lawyer tells him that about Ronald Reagan's Commission on Organized Crime, and that one of the investigative arms, or one of the investigative avenues, I should say, is about drug trafficking, mob drug trafficking. Now, up to this point, Tom, he had never told me anything about the extent of his drug trafficking. Talked a little bit about going from Knickerbocker Avenue to Bensonhurst, but the whole pizza connection stuff, that was all things we learned after. So he calls up a detective who I turned him on to after I was done with him, and says to him, "I can help with that commission." And they brought him in from Minnesota. That was what he was doing. I knew, and I say in the book that I knew he wasn't telling me everything when he talked to me. And this is what he was holding. He was holding this trump card, and he played it, and it got him out of jail. It got him into witness protection. He wound up testifying in front of Congress, and then he wound up testifying for Rudy Giuliani and free at the Pizza Connection trial. And after it was all over, he was a free man in witness protection. Now, he makes a little mistake. He tries to, because again, he was in need of money, and he wanted to try to squeeze money out of the wise guys by saying, "You know what, I'll change my testimony," until someone whispered in his ear and told him, "You change your testimony, you're going back to jail." So he recants his recantation, and he is set free. They go to trial, he testifies, and all of the Pizza Connection defendants get convicted. Now he's left on his own in places in Iowa, in Minnesota, in Arizona, in Alabama, because they had to move him a lot because there were a lot of people looking, and he was testifying. He was supposed to testify again. There were people going to kill him. There were a lot of people looking to kill him. He was the key, I told you, because of his transportation of the drugs. And he couldn't take it. He couldn't take it. He hated the life. He hated the food. He hated the way he was living. And one day I learned, as part of my research for the book, that he wound up killing himself. I thought all along that he had died in jail, that he had gone back. Somehow he had fallen off the wagon and gone back to jail, but he didn't. he killed himself as a protected witness. And but it was a guy that, I got to tell you, man, I'll never forget Roncesvalles. And obviously I didn't, because 20 years later, we wrote this book.
We're doing the 4th episode on him.
Fourth
Clearly
episode. So
clearly he hasn't
and
done.
yeah. You know, Carmine Galante, by the way, gets killed. You know, he gets assassinated by his own people, because I told you before how stingy they were. They weren't going to share the money. Well, he wasn't even sharing with his own family. He was giving them a pittance, and he was keeping millions himself. And then and listen to who did this. The Zips got together, and they got 2 guys, and they did him in. They were his bodyguards. They set the whole thing up, hired guys. The bodyguards in the middle of the summer, Tom, middle of the summer, hot summer, July day. They pick up Galante to bring him to a restaurant for lunch with some of his friends, and they're dressed in leather coats, leather jackets. Who dresses in the middle of the summer, leather jacket? They knew what was coming. And when the assassins came into the backyard, which is where they were eating, they opened up and they hid behind, underneath tables and stuff, and they were afraid of getting hit with shrapnel. That's why they had it on. So anyway, that is the that brings me to the end of the saga of Luigi Roncesvalles. But it was an experience that I will obviously never forget. And now it's for posterity, and Homicide is my business. So there's a lot more that I obviously I give every detail, but I really encourage people who are interested in this kind of this subject to get the book. There's some mafia history. You've read it, and
I've read it, and I've highly recommended it. It's one of the few books that I've actually sent to people off air, not just kissing ass on air, but one of the few books I've sent. And it's not a long book, and it's kind of like Goodfellas, the book, but it's real, and it was written by Mike, and you can hear him talking about it on this show. And I know we gotta wrap this one up rather abruptly. Real quick, could you say the name of the new book coming out? And then
the new book is called Fallen Angel, a true crime fantasy. And just a brief description. It's all of the crimes that are depicted in the book are real cases. They're all my cases. And the premise is that a prosecutor is recruited by the Vatican and by the Department of Justice to combat a evil force that has kind of settled into Brooklyn. And it turns out the evil force is Satan. And so he has been doing this in other parts of the world and other parts of the country, and he's gotten away with it, instigating these horrific crimes because he undermined the arrests, undermined the cases, the investigations in these other parts. So they needed someone strong who could withstand this instigation or the undermining of his evidence. And the prosecutor his name is Michael Gioca, and he is the chief of the rackets division in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. So it's obviously an autobiographical aspect to it, and all the crimes that are written about in there are all true crimes, and that's why it's a true crime fantasy, which is obviously the story around the crimes. It's fantasy. So far, I have to say, the people who have read it have really loved it. They said that they can't wait for number 2, and I'm almost finished with book 2 of Fallen Angel. So we'll be talking a lot, hopefully, about that book, and the 4 crimes that are depicted in Fallen Angel. We'll talk about. They're things you and I have never talked about. Okay. And so it's a whole new set of criminal figures and crimes, etc. So that's it. So thank you very much for the plug, and they're all available. Fallen Angel is not an audio book yet, but it's a Kindle. It's an ebook as well as in print. And hopefully we're going to do the ebook soon, and I think I'm going to be the narrator. So I'm hoping that we do it, so get it out, because I know that you guys like to have that ebook.
Audiobook, yeah,
right, audiobook. I'm sorry, audiobook, not ebook.
Yeah. So. No, absolutely makes it.
All right, so that's it, my friend. Thank you very much for having me, and I wait for the next time.
Hell yeah! And Mike, send me a reminder. I got a million things I got to do today. Send me a reminder text so that you don't fall off into the ether, so that I get you in and I schedule you today. because if I
No
don't,
problem.
you and I both know I'm going to forget. So just send me a reminder text.
Okay.
All right,
Thank you,
brother.
Tom.
Thank you so much, guys. Go in the description, check out the books, check out the writings, and yeah, go grab it. Till next time, Mike.